Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Chicago online worship. I'm Keiran Eatinger, a member of this congregation, and I'm glad to serve as your worship associate today. We are a Unitarian Universalist congregation, a community of children, youth, and adults, a people of many beliefs and traditions, bound not by the specific list of things that we believe, but by the values we share, and the mission to grow our souls and heal the world. Whether you are joining us online for the first time, or you've worshipped with us thousands of times, you are welcome here. Whether you believe in God some of the time, all of the time, or none of the time, you are welcome here. No matter how much money is in your pocket, no matter if you have a PhD, a GED, or no degree, you belong here. We are people of many races and beliefs. We are people of many genders and sexual orientations. All of you is sacred. All of you is welcome. You belong here. Due to this coronavirus pandemic, we must distance ourselves physically, but we can still stay connected. In addition to our weekly worship on YouTube, follow us on our Facebook page for fresh pastoral content during this week. We have several small groups meeting by phone and Zoom video conferencing, both for connection and church business. To get involved, check your weekly email blast or email the church office for more information. Contact information is on our website. If the economic hardships of the coronavirus are affecting you, this church is at your side. Our ministers can refer you to resources, as well as offering one-time grants from the minister's discretionary fund. To the members and friends of this congregation, for more information, just contact the church office to be in touch with Rev. Teri or Rev. David. Throughout today's service, you can interact with one another throughout comment sections. Simply log on to your account or create a new YouTube account and leave comments, reactions, and share prayer requests. I invite you now to be present in this moment. Let us enter into this service together and let the prelude begin.
Our chalice lighting words come from Laura Califanucci. When this is over. When this is over, may we never take for granted a handshake with a stranger, full shelves at the store, conversations with neighbors, a crowded theater, Friday night out, the taste of communion, a routine checkup, the school rush each morning, coffee with a friend, the stadium roaring, each deep breath. A boring Tuesday, life itself. When this ends, may we find that we have become more like the people we wanted to be, we were called to be, we hope to be, and may we stay that way, better for each other because of the worst. We light this chalice, the flame of life itself, that we may be better for each other because of the worst.
Will you join with me in the words for our covenant and then give a warm welcome to each other in the chat? Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Good morning. At this time, please gather those who are young at heart, and your furry friends for a time for all ages. Thank you. Have you ever heard the song, Going on a Bear Hunt? Last year, our kindergarten class sang it and talked about the UU connection to the seventh principle of caring for our planet Earth, the home which we share with all living things. In the song, every time the main characters come to an obstacle on their way to go and see the bears, they discuss how they can't go over it. For example, they can't go over the tall grass. And they can't go under the obstacles. For example, they can't go under a shallow river. They simply have to go through the hard stuff if they want to get where they are going. And indeed, this social distancing time is something that we can't skip over, and we can't hide under or away from it, but we must go through it. As we go through, we may feel alone, but we are not alone in our journey. In this case, there are reminders of that when we look around the neighborhood. For all that we have gone through, we do in fact get to see the bear. In Chicago, people have been placing teddy bears and other stuffed animals in their windows for those who are young at heart to find as they walk by. If you like, you can join in by placing a teddy bear or an other stuffed animal, or even just a drawing of one in your window. And to enjoy the bears, if you cannot leave to go on your own bear hunt, please enjoy this virtual one this morning. Thank you.
Friends, I invite you now into a spirit of prayer and meditation. We'll begin with words for reflection, then silence and prayer, and an opportunity to share in the chat the names of anyone you want to lift up in the love of this community, keeping in mind that it is public, these comments. Will you join me? Breathe deep the breath of life. And be here now, be where you are. Let the world hold you up. This is called To Live in the Longing by Steve Garnes Holmes. You who live in temperate zones, who haven't lived through these months here of cold, shoveling more snow, living in box canyons of snow, under worried roofs, dripping walls, chipping ice, walking stiff-kneed on ice, dressing complicatedly for every sojourn, the layers, the precautions, things matted, frozen shut, the dark skies continually falling dark. If you haven't looked out windows, trying to remember what a yard looks like, trying to guess where the ground is, longing for green, longing for smells, longing to walk across grass, to be outside and not hurt, longing for something to be easy. You who haven't lived through these months, do you know this yearning for light, for warmth, for beauty, for release? Do you know this ache? I believe you know it. With or without the metaphor in your yard, it's the ache for a new world, for the old life to close its winter eye, the ice grave to crack wide open, for your true self to walk toward you out of the darkness. It's the ache for freedom. The long, dark ache for Easter. It's not a bad thing to live in the longing, with even grace not merely laid at your feet yet, not of your doing, but purely gift, to know you are waiting, and to know what you are hungry for, and how deep is your longing, and that it is coming. Today, the poet says, today is the first day of spring. The forecast is for snow. I am filled with hope. We'll be together in silence for 7 breaths. With my heart's imagination, I feel us together in the silence, in front of screens in houses and apartments, in rooms all around the city and the country, connected, apart. Will you join me in a spirit of prayer? God, Spirit of life, breath of life, hidden wholeness that moves in the space between us, help us to remember. Help us to remember that we hold in our hearts parents and teachers and all those whose primary spiritual practice is caring for children. In this time of mandatory school cancellations, of home quarantine, we are with you. We are with you. We pray for those who live with grief and with chronic pain, with mental disability, with addiction, all of these that we carry through the world invisibly with us. Those are immunosuppressed, with heart or lung conditions, diabetes, these illnesses unseen sometimes. We remember you, we see you, we are with you. For our neighbors in prison with even less control and even more uncertainty than on any other Sunday, we are with you. We see you. For those who care for family in ill health, for those who care for loved ones while ill themselves, for those who can't see the people who you love because of mandatory confinement, because these are borders we can't cross right now. We are with you, we love you, we see you. For those of you who are struggling to stay afloat in the midst of poverty, of uncertainty, financial insecurity, job loss in this pandemic, those without health insurance, we are with you. We see you. We are in this together. And we remember with gratitude all those working tirelessly, doctors, nurses, paramedics, pharmacists, all the support staff who make treatment possible. We see you, we remember you, we are grateful for you. In this community, we lift up in love and care Doug Anderson, who passed away this week. We lift up in the love of this community Richard Pardo, who is ill, and Alan Lindrup, who is recovering from COVID. Friends, I invite you to put into the chat anyone you wish to lift up, any hope or joy or sorrow that you have, that you want to be held in the love of this community. There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. We're gonna keep on till we find it. There is more love somewhere. Amen.
All you can do is walk into Jerusalem with the hosannas ringing in your ears and the palms coming at you in every direction, when you're already remembering the bitter of what comes next. Even then, all you have is the moving forward into the city and the call that says, you've been preparing for this your whole life. That every good thing will come undone does not make it all make-believe. And when the world turns upside down and lovers become strangers, and thieves and betrayers turn out to be the beloved beside you in the dark, even when the palms turn to passion, even then, you can still throw your arms open wide and turn forgiveness over and over on your tongue until it just falls out. And you find yourself empty of everything for a moment. Until the breath begins again, the rise, the fall, and the next morning comes, gloriously steady with life. It's been another week that's heavy on the heart. Friday, more than 1,033,000 COVID cases worldwide. More than 54,000 deaths. And it has come to our congregation. a heavy heart. 94 million Americans out of work. The economy collapsing. A heavy heart. Refrigerated trucks to be temporary morgues. Field hospitals. FEMA orders 100,000 body bags. A heavy heart. Domestic violence hotlines surge with calls from people who in quarantine cannot escape to save their lives. A heavy heart. The dying cannot be comforted at the bedside as they struggle to breathe their last breaths. The grieving cannot gather to mourn. A heavy heart. Half of the planet is on lockdown. This is a litany of lament of biblical proportion. The Greek statesman Solon said, "Myth is not about something that never happened. It's about something that happens over and over again." In the Jewish and Christian traditions, this is a week of telling important stories. Stories that happen over and over again. Plagues, the deaths of innocents, betrayal, loss, freedom, renewal, love, hard-won hope, and victory, at least for a time. Stories we learn, stories we live, stories we live through. On Wednesday evening, the Jewish festival of Passover begins. The Hebrew word Magid means to tell the story. It is the same word root in the word Haggadah. The Haggadah is the book read at the Seder dinner, a weighty yet joyous story of the Exodus, of the journey from Jews as slaves in Egypt to freedom. It's a story told in prayer, song, and symbolic food. In the Seder, we don't just retell the story of the Israelites' Exodus. We come to see ourselves in the story. We remember, we become. Egypt was known as Mitzrayim, the Hebrew word that means the narrow place, the place that squeezes the breath out. How fitting for this week. No place is always Mitzrayim, but any place, even our own, can become Mitzrayim, especially now, this time of heavy hearts. The Pharaoh's heart, too, was heavy, not with heartbreak nor compassion, but kaved, the Hebrew word for heavy, closed off, impervious, resistant, immovable. The Israelites were slaves, making bricks in the hot sun for Pharaoh's buildings. And I imagine amidst the pyramids that the workers were never paid. I imagine a glittering glass tower with the letters P-H-A-R-A-O-H on the side. Moses, the divinely appointed union negotiator, asked for freedom. In response, Pharaoh, his heart kaved, ordered the taskmasters to no longer provide straw for the Israelites to make bricks. Now they were to gather straw and make as many bricks as before, or be subject to torture. The Pharaoh's heart was stiffened, hardened. The text says this 20 times to convey the point that he became unresponsive to reason and incapable of compassion. The Haggadah reminds us that Egypt was destroyed because it showed no concern for human beings. And so any nation that mistreats its people and does not care about human suffering will eventually be destroyed, if even by its own doing. A nation that doesn't provide basic human rights, healthcare, food, water, that pays the palace of the Pharaoh with the wages of the worker cannot long stand. Plagues are visited upon the Egyptians: blood, frogs, lice, wild beasts, cattle disease, boils, hail, locusts, darkness. But the Pharaoh was not moved, his heart heavy, kaved, immovable. That wasn't till the last plague. The 10th and final plague has always horrified and perplexed me: the slaying of the firstborn. From the Pharaoh to the Egyptian slave girl, the text said, the animals of veneration and the beasts of burden, no one would be spared. This is a plague that would visit every home. The slaying of the firstborn does not discriminate between race, class, nor education, nor does coronavirus. In the story and in the Seder dinner, there's an impulse to run from that moment, and from this one, to cling to the belief that innocents never suffer. It is that plague, and this one, that lifts the veil on the injustice built into the very foundation of our American temples. It is a novel virus that refracts our gaze to stark clarity, to see the fragility of our social safety net, our healthcare system, the human body. It is now that we read of people who have lived here, in the wealthiest country in the world, without water running in their homes. It is now that universal health care seems not only reasonable, but required. Prisoners are released, debts are frozen. It was only by a plague that came to his own son in his own home that the Pharaoh, who thought himself God, let the Israelites go. Prisoners released. That plague, the slaying of the firstborn, was to happen in the dark of the night. The Talmud says, "And not one of you shall leave the threshold of his house till morning." Thus, the Israelites were instructed to be under stay-at-home orders, while the angel of death traveled from house to house. Before that night, the Israelites were instructed to sacrifice a lamb. They were to roast it, eat it, and mark their doorposts with blood, so that the angel of death would pass over their homes as they remained quarantined inside. Death would pass over. Pesach, the root of our English word Paschal. But the Hebrew word Pesach also means this: to have compassion, to protect. Their sacrifice of staying in their homes would protect them, and it will protect you. But here we come to another puzzling part of the story. Why does the angel of death need to know who's who? Wouldn't the angel of death, of all beings, know who is slave and who is free? Who is rich and who is poor? Who is Egyptian and who is Israelite? Perhaps there's far greater wisdom here. Death is blind. Death knows no distinction of class, race, subjugation, or occupation. Death is the original equal opportunity employer with whom we each have an appointment, even if we don't yet know the time. The Israelites were to mark their doorposts with blood of the Lamb so that the angel of death would pass over. One Jewish commentary suggests that they were to mark their doorposts on the inside. By marking their doors, the mark was for them to know who they were. It was for them to remember to stay inside. It was the safest place to be. It was for them to remember they were a people of dignity, waiting for that moment to break free of their home quarantine, their bondage, ready to make haste at a moment's notice, to grab bread for the journey before it even had time to rise. Mark your hearts. Mark your doors, so you remember who you are. Fast forward about 1,500 years. Passover, as the story of Exodus, has been celebrated for about 60 generations by this point. Now Jerusalem is occupied by the Romans, and the Romans appointed Jewish authorities to rule over their local jurisdictions. Now this is an interesting double bind. The Jewish authorities must demonstrate to Roman rule that they can control and govern their people, or they risk losing the ability to rule their people at all. And not unlike Chicago, on occasion power begets corruption, and often the powerful benefit when the poor are left with very little. It was those powerful Jewish rulers, a very small minority, who were in smoke-filled rooms with the Romans. Those were the Jews Jesus was protesting. And here's what we know. The historical Jesus was a manual laborer, a carpenter. He was born to undocumented immigrants, an unwed teenage mother. He escaped genocide, and he didn't settle down and have a respectable career, but instead became an itinerant rabbi. He wandered around with the outcasts of his society. And he started community organizing, the original one-on-one conversations. He built powerful networks of poor people, tax collectors, and sex workers. He organized networks of poor people who questioned the ruling powers, and this was not a recipe for personal safety nor social stability. Some things in our world, people of goodwill must be maladjusted. The tension between Jesus and his followers and the powers that be grew and grew and grew. He was 33. They told him, "You look awfully young to be a minister." He said he did an internship with John the Baptist. They said, "Okay, preach." He was 33. The time for the Passover festival had come, and the Jews were to journey to Jerusalem to celebrate at the temple. And he was a community organizer, and I want you to think that he was bringing his people to the March on Washington. And the day arrived, today, Palm Sunday. In Luke's account, as Jesus approaches Jerusalem, he looks over the city and he weeps. I imagine him holding the city in his eyes. Like when you come in for a landing in Midway Airport and you can see the lake, you can see the skyscrapers glittering, and knowing the untold suffering, the unknown joys, the corruption, the possibility, the lives of all the people of the city. Jesus weeps. The rulers could have ruled differently. They could have provided for everyone. There had been enough, after all. The Romans could have ordered surgical masks rather than downplaying a deadly virus. They could have supported a $200 million pandemic warning program rather than shutting it down in the fall. They could have strengthened services to the poor because it was the right thing to do, rather than benefit the wealthy. There had been enough, after all. And so Jesus enters Jerusalem on a donkey. He rides in on a donkey to reference a scripture from the prophet Zechariah. Now think of it like this. He was playing with a pop culture reference that everyone would get. He rides on a donkey not because it was convenient, but to be political. He was not a Roman warrior returning victorious on a war horse. He was a homeless community organizer. The crowds got it. They play along. They lay down palms and their cloaks. This is what you're supposed to do when the war hero comes to town. The people were lampooning the Roman rulers. Think of this Palm Sunday less like an Anglican church procession and more like Occupy Wall Street. All at once, the poor, ready to celebrate a festival of freedom, have a moment to mock the ruling class. They mock the Romans. They mock the Jews in power that were appointed by the Romans. And they also honor Jesus, and they say, this man said our lives matter. Jesus is smart. He knows what's coming. He rides into Jerusalem like Dr. King checks into the Lorraine Motel. The exact moment may not be known, but the danger is unmistakable. He is a wanted man. He dismounts from his donkey and he walks towards Good Friday. And so do we. He walks to an upper room and he celebrates Passover with his friends, Megid. They tell the story. He's betrayed in the night. He's executed by the state on the next day, Good Friday. Myth is not about something that never happened. It's about something that happens over and over again. Good Friday, the death of innocence, exploitation by the powerful, the inescapability of suffering, the certainty of death, the sorrow of loss. There's an impulse to run from that moment and from this one. We are walking towards Good Friday. The president says, I want every American to be prepared for the hard days that lie ahead. We're going to go through a very tough 2 weeks. I agree with very little that the president says, but in this respect, he is right. The number of US deaths could range from 100,000 to 240,000, even with the stay-at-home orders. Our hearts are heavy. Let us weep for our city with compassion. We are walking toward Good Friday, even if 6 feet apart. Megid, tell the story. We are commanded to tell the story of liberation as if we were a part of it, as if it's not someone else's story but our own, because ultimately it is true. In this spirit, we see ourselves as participants in the Exodus, and we must dedicate our energies to the cause there begun, because we have not just been freed from, we have been freed for. It is said, whoever enlarges the story of the Exodus is praiseworthy. We will not get to the promised land without passing first through the desert, through Good Friday. But I can say this, Good Friday is never the end of the story. We know not if nor when our people, our society, our world, ourselves will come out the other side. Maybe there's not quite another side to come out of. Some of us will not make it. But I can say this, Good Friday never has the final word. There is always spring, there is always rebirth, there is always Easter, even if we know not the day on the calendar nor the hour. But for this week, hold your hearts tenderly. Let yourself weep for your city, that our hearts not become kaved, heavy, but heavy with compassion. As you do so, you will be given the Paschal blessing of compassion. And may you know these Paschal blessings too. May you be protected, and may this pass over you. May the sacrifices you make now for your loved ones and for society mark the doors to your heart, so you remember who you are and who you are for. And may we be for one another, now and in all the days to come. Amen.
Friends, in a moment of uncertainty, which is also financial uncertainty and job uncertainty, we don't call people to give until it hurts, but to give until you feel good about giving. And the reality is, if you have lost your job, if you may be losing your job, whether now or in the weeks and months ahead, there shouldn't be any blame or shame or guilt around not being able to fulfill a pledge commitment, say, that you've made to the congregation. That's okay, and this happens, and we face it forthrightly, without anything. It's part of the reality of how life works, and it's okay. If that's the case for you, you're still exactly as welcome here as you were before. It feels silly to say it on the one hand, but it's easy to feel that way inside sometimes. And so I want to say, if you have a change in your finances, if you don't expect to be able to make the pledge commitment that you made, just give a call or an email to a board member, to the church office, to me, or to Reverend Teri. And we are not going to make you feel bad about that. We're going to say, thank you so much for giving you a heads up. Thank you so much for giving a heads up. And what can we do to help? And how can this community get your back right now? Friends, we're here for each other. We still operate from our values in a time of uncertainty, which means we as a congregation are committed to continuing to pay our hourly workers the same amount that they would have been making if our building was still open, if they could be coming in each week. And every 2 weeks we are cutting those checks, even though they can't be here physically, because they shouldn't have to bear the burden of pandemic and loss of employment hours, while our salaried employees don't. We're all in this together. We're committed to this. We're taking care of each other. And it is your financial contributions. It's your support that makes that possible. We don't have money that's coming in from somewhere else. It's all of us together doing what we can as we're able in the moment. 2 ways to give. Go to firstuschicago.org. Scroll down to the donate button, all the way at the bottom of the page. And you can give online, both a one-time gift or set up a recurring payment. The other thing you can do, and this is the first time we've ever done it, is text to give. We've set up text to give, and I've got my phone here because I have never done this before, so we're going to do this together. Rarely during a service do I say, friends, please take your phones out and look at them. Here's the number. It's 773-900-6051. And to that number, you're going to text an amount. So I've got this on my phone right now, and I am going to put in 20 for $20, and I'm going to find out what happens. I texted. It says, it looks like you're a new giver. And there's a link there to go to Breeze, which is our church membership management software, and to set up payment, right? Just like you set up all sorts of other payments online. I invite you now to join me as you're able to support the ongoing work and the mission of this church, which is not just a place, but also a people, all of us.